You're listening to The Power Project. I'm your host, Brandy Voth, and it's my goal each week to inspire and empower you to go out and live purpose-filled lives and own your God-given power. Some weeks that looks like spotlights of women that are doing just that. Other weeks, it's a little purposeful business coaching. Occasionally, we tackle topics that we as women just need to talk about. And then weeks like this, I bring you something that I just love and want to share with you. So we are going back to my original first love in life, the love when I fell in love with printed word on perfectly crisp pages bound together in the miracle that we call a book. So without further ado, let's jump right in, shall we? So welcome back to the Power Project, you guys. This week we are diving into books, and they are books that I love. I've done a few book studies on my Facebook page, and as well as I've done some book studies on this podcast, but I really started looking into the books that I read, why I read them, what turned me onto them in the first place. And I talked to some of my friends and realized that I've been an avid reader my entire life. I have always read, and I read a lot of fiction growing up, but I've found myself in this space recently where I have read a lot of personal development books. And while that's not bad, it's great. I read business books. I read empowerment books. I read anything and everything that can further me along in this journey that I'm on. But I do kind of miss the fiction. And I've always said that I'm the person that if toilet paper had words on it, I would totally read it. I don't know about you guys, but I loved Cheerios as a kid. Like, I love Cheerios, I love Fruit Loops, I love Frosted Flakes. I wasn't a big breakfast eater. I did not care to have bacon and eggs or anything like that before school. I really just wanted a bowl of Fruit Loops and a cup of coffee because I was that kid that had a cup of coffee before I went to school. I would read the words on the box because I'm like this incessant reader. Maybe it's my OCD, but I have a hard time not reading words that are in front of me. And so even though I would read the same words over and over, like day in and day out every morning, I could recite the cereal box to you. I still read them every day. I knew the nutrition content of everything that I ate, not because I was concerned about the nutritional value of the Fruit Loops that I was putting into my mouth, but just because they were words, and I love words. I'm obsessed with words. It's been that way as long as I can remember. And as much as I love to speak and talk and learn and read, I love stories. I love getting lost in another world. I love words taking shape off of a page and transforming me. I love imagery. I love being able to visualize what the author is telling me that is happening. I love the emotional rise and fall of a book. I love the climax. I love the build up to that. I love the conclusion. I love books. I love books that make me better. I love books that make me smarter. I love books that entertain me. They have been some of my best friends in life. And literally as a kid, I had a series of books that I considered the characters in those books my friends. And I talked about them like they were my friends in real life. So I sat down today and I kind of wrote out books that have really had an impact on me throughout life. So I want to share those with you guys today. I hope that when you're making your summer reading list, maybe some of these books make your list. Maybe you have heard of these books before. Maybe you've never heard of them at all. And so you can see what I enjoyed in the early years of life, in the junior high years of life, high school, college, marriage, being a young mom, being a mom whose kids are a little older. I've walked you through the books that I've just really loved over the years. So I really credit my love of books to being not just that I woke up one morning as a young child and was like, oh my gosh, I love books. I firmly believe that a person's love of books comes from their parents reading to them. I really think that reading to your kids is so important. And you guys, if you are not reading, if you're a mom of young ones and you're not reading to your young ones, read to them. I promise you, they will fall in love with it just like you do. If you're a mom that is reading when you can, great job. And if you're a mom who is reading all the time, excellent. But I do believe that we can instill that love of reading in our kids. I know that my mom did it with me. I did it with my kids. I have one that is a bookworm, book nerd, just like I was. And then I have another that he will read everything about sports and everything that interests him, but he's not totally concerned in just mainstream reading. So I was the bookworm from as early as I can remember. My mom would take us to the library, and that's how we spent days on end and summertime. And we would read, I would read Curious George at the library. I loved it. And the library had the little kiddie center with the little like beanbag chairs and cube nooks. And I can smell the smell of the library books. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like a musty smell, but it also is this smell of, I can close my eyes right now and smell like magical worlds of fiction and learning and education. And so this like kiddie corner was just fun. It was fun and fictitious and exciting and adventurous. It was whatever book that I picked up was what that kiddie corner turned into. But I love the Curious George series from a very early age. I was reading at the age of 4, reading and writing. And I believe I was around 4 when I was reading the Curious George books at the library. I loved the little pictures and the little like comic quotes that went along with it. I loved The Man in the Yellow Hat. There was a book about balloons where George is like carrying the balloons. There's a book about George getting into a construction vehicle and accidentally putting the truck in drive. I loved the curiosity of the monkey. I loved the colors of the book, and I loved the story that it walked me through. So that's like the earliest memory I have of reading. And my mom, like I was saying, like she read to us as kids. She read to us all the time. And when we were sick, I'll never forget, we had whooping cough for an entire summer. I was 4, my brother was 2, I believe. We may have been barely 4, barely 2. And we were on not house arrest. We were quarantined to the house during this time of sickness. And we weren't supposed to go out in public because it was so highly contagious. So we had this little tent set up with our steam, the steam and the mentholatum and everything that was in this tent for us to sit in to do our breathing treatments. And in order to keep us in there, we had these stacks of books that we would read while we sat in there and did our breathing treatments. And I used that. I used that with my kids when it was time to potty train them and I couldn't keep them on the toilet to learn. I would read to them the whole time they were on the toilet. And not only was I lucky enough to have a mom that read to me, but I also met my best friend when I was 5 years old. I moved into the house across the street from her. She was thrilled to have a little girl on the street because I think there was, at this time, one other girl on the street that was a few years older. And we both had a strong love for reading. So we were kids that we would just hang out and read together. We would read when we laid out in the backyard. We would read in the treehouse. We would crawl under my bed with flashlights at night and read so that my mom wouldn't know we were up. And we were just both total bookworms. And one series that we were hooked on was The Babysitter's Club. And any of you 80s babies are going to remember what I'm talking about. It was The Babysitter's Club by Anne Martin. I loved this book series. It was about these friends that had formed this club where they babysat, and it was ran like a business, and they had meetings. They had a president, they had a vice president, they had a secretary, a treasurer, and they babysat, and they assigned whomever could go to the babysitting job that fit that family. And they had all of these like neat little procedures in place to run this business. We both loved those books. I actually owned every single one of those books at the age of 20 years old when I had a garage sale and I sold them all. I kick myself to this day, not because I have a little girl to pass them on to, but just because that was literally like my entire childhood wrapped up in a book series. And I cannot believe I sold them all. I sold them in a garage sale, and a lady bought the entire series. Like, I remember us saving up our money for whatever odds and end job or chore we had done to get paid, and rushing out to buy the newest Babysitters Club book. That Chrissy was the girl in the book that I was probably the most like. And looking back at the series, she was the president of the club. She was super bossy. She was outspoken, and her loud mouth got her in trouble regularly. And she was a know-it-all. She was also the shortest in her grade. So there were a lot of things that I resembled in as a child with Chrissy. But she came from a big family, and she loves sports. So that totally was not me, because I was completely uncoordinated and ungifted in the sports arena, and I only had one brother. But I so wanted to be like Stacy. Stacy in this series was from New York, and she was into fashion. She was really worldly, and she was blue-eyed and blonde. And I just remember always thinking like how much I envied Stacy, but I knew in my heart of hearts I was Chrissy, and there was nothing I could do about it. Even if I like bleached my hair blonde, I was never going to be Stacy. But that was my childhood. I remember taking a wheelbarrow and like tipping it on its side and sitting inside of a wheelbarrow to prop up and read. I was that kid that I went and hid and read on a regular basis. That was my favorite pastime. That was my escape. And I would talk to my mom, and I would tell her stories that I had read in the book. And I would speak like these people were my friends. I would say, Mom, oh my gosh, Chrissy was babysitting for the Johnsons yesterday. And this boy, the youngest one, he spilled Kool-Aid all over the counter. And my mom would be like, who's Chrissy and who are the Johnsons? And I would have to remember that this was a book series I was reading and remind her, these aren't my friends. This is the book I'm talking about. So I loved that. If your kids have a series of books that they are into, embrace that and run with that, because it will really cultivate their love of reading. And I didn't just read fictitious books as a kid or easy read books. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was also a Sweet Valley High series after the Babysitters Club that I read for a bit, but it was always a little more shallow to me than the Babysitters Club. But in the 4th grade, I read the unabridged version of Little Women. And I don't even know what made me decide to pick up that book that had to have been as thick as my hand was wide at the time. I do remember it was 1,293 pages of unabridged Old English print. And I just decided this was something I wanted to read, I wanted to commit to. And so I checked it out from my school's library. My librarian and my teacher both asked me if this was something I was sure that I wanted to get. And I assured them that this was the book I wanted to read, and I was committing to reading it. So obviously I was not going to finish it in a week like you have before you have to return library books. So I checked this out it was in the winter. It was over Thanksgiving. It was during like hunting season. So my family would go to the deer lease on the weekends where we camped. And I would check it out each week and just keep reading and keep plugging away. I would read in the back seat of my dad's truck on the way to the deer lease with a flashlight. My grandma at the same time decided that she had not read the unabridged version. So she was going to read it with me. So she went and checked it out at the public library, and we both read Little Women at the same time. And I finished it in, I believe it was about 8 weeks maybe, I think is how long it took me to read it. I know it was less than 3 months, because I know that my teachers were commenting on it, is the only reason those time frames stick out in my mind. But I loved it. I fell in love with the characters of Little Women. And it didn't even matter that it was written in a manner of speak that no one used in my time. I just fell in love with Marmee and Joe and Amy and Meg and Beth. I loved all their different characters and their different personalities. And I love the fact that Joe went on to write and to do things she wasn't supposed to do in that time period. And I just became enthralled in it. I've since gone on to read the more abridged version of it. I've seen the first movie, the second movie, and I just love that story. It's a story that will always be near and dear to my heart. And then throughout junior high and high school, I found this series by Janette Oke. It's a series of Christian novels And it's about early settlers, sharecroppers. It's like the pioneer days. And it follows a family through these various generations. It starts with a young girl who turns into a mom, who turns into a grandma and a great grandma. And it follows all the generations of the family from the female perspective. And I really enjoyed seeing the changes of the female role that Janette portrayed in those books. That's another great series that you could hook a young girl on. Like if you have a junior high girl, that's a great series to get them hooked on. It was so neat. I always loved the overcoming adversity that the settlers had to go through and all of the harsh realities that we did not ever face. Just reading about how they would walk to school or ride in a wagon or churn butter or, not have crops during the winter. And so I think that was something that gave me just a different perspective and outlook on growing up, in a more cushy, easy way of life. And in high school, I found Nora Roberts. If you guys have not read Nora Roberts, she has some really great romance novels, but I fell in love with her Irish trilogy. And what I loved about those books was her imagery. She could really paint a scene, whether she was talking about a stream or the sky or a cobblestone path. I loved the imagery that she entwined into the novels of this trilogy. It was really fantastic. I haven't just always had different trilogies and series. There have been a few books that have been really staples in my life that I read throughout high school and college and as a young adult. And they were ones that really stuck out in the form of social issues that really hit home for me. I was obsessed with the Scarlett Letter when we had to read that in high school. I know some people may be rolling your eyes at home and wondering why on earth I would have been obsessed with the Scarlett Letter. But I really empathized with the judgment, the Puritan judgment that she faced. I felt like just being raised as legalistically in the environment that I was as a kid, I really could feel her pain and her stoicism of being judged and proudly keeping her head held high. So I wasn't the girl that rolled her eyes at having to read the Scarlett Letter. I wrote several papers over it, and to this day, it's a really impactful book on me. And then, who remembers Great Expectations? Come on now, I can't be the only one that actually really enjoyed it. Mrs. Havisham was so eccentric that I was intrigued by her uniqueness and her eccentricity, but yet I was so sad for her. Like, she was so lonely and full of despair, and I loved all of the symbolism in Great Expectations. Like, I was that book nerd. I literally was that literature nerd that I loved the symbolism. I loved all the hidden undertones of a book. So, yep, that one makes my list on super impactful books in my life. And then The Brave New World was another that I was obsessed with. To this day, it's one of my all-time favorite books. I think the fact that Aldous Huxley was able to write a book in 1931 that is still relevant to what we see happening in our society today blows my mind. Like, how on earth can someone predict and put into a literary form the societal change and where we're going to be and where it's geared towards? I mean, it's nuts. I wrote a book over it. I wrote a paper over it in high school about all the ways that it amazed me, and I did the comparisons of what he used in that book and compared it with things that we saw in our time in my high school years. And today I could take it and compare it to what we're seeing today that all ties back to the exact same themes of society. And it was such a great paper that when I had to write a paper in college over an impactful book that I thought pointed out weaknesses and flaws in our society, I went back to that paper and revamped it for college and I got an A+ both times. So if you haven't read that or you haven't read it since high school, I highly encourage you to go pick that up and read it again. You'll be amazed. I seriously think you will. I'm not pulling your leg here.
This episode brought to you by Brandy Voth Beauty.
Have you tried the #1 skincare brand in all of North America? Girl, what are you waiting for? Hop over to the-powerproject.com/powerfulbeauty, take a 5-question skincare consultation, and email yourself the results. As a thank you, I'm going to personally send you a gift in the mail. That's the-powerproject.com/powerfulbeauty. So, all right, moving out of high school and into a couple of just free flow books that really hit home for me. One was the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. I don't know who has read that here, but I'm going to tell you, if you haven't read it, go pick it up today and read it. And the reason that I remember I read it in high school as just an extracurricular book that I was reading at the time. And one of the things that I think it was high school, maybe it was college. I don't know what year it came out on. So don't send me hate mail if I'm getting the year wrong. But it's about this family of missionaries, the Prices. They're from Georgia and they moved to the Congo. And it really just hit home so much for me because it was so much of the white privilege that came out in this book. And I didn't even know back then what white privilege was as a term. But these Westerners take their religious beliefs, their religious traditions, and they are going to push this on the natives of the Congo, and they're going to save them. And I see this, we all see this happen, right? I mean, we see people lined up for mission trips to go save people in other countries, but they don't realize that you can't barge in with your own cultures and tell them that everything they're doing is wrong and that they have to do it your way or they can't make it to heaven. It was like they went in and told all the natives that they had to put clothes on and they were going to go to hell for not being dressed. And instead of just loving on them and letting them just see Jesus, they had the right idea behind it. They had good intentions, but they had poor execution. And we all see that today in our everyday life. So it's told through the voice of the mother. And then it is also told, the rest of the book is told throughout the voices of the sisters. And it's just the different realizations of how we can go and be the hands and feet of Jesus without hammering our religion and our cultures down someone's throat that can't even register what we're speaking about because it's such a foreign concept. And I think, Jen Hatmaker even talks about if it doesn't work for an African mama in a village, it doesn't work for me, that type of thing. So it's a really, really great book. I love it. I mean, I'm going through all these books and I'm like, I need to go pick them up and reread them. And I'm going to move on to one that I picked up in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm not certain if I picked it up on my first trip in high school or my second trip in college, but it's called My Mother's Secret, and it's about a girl surviving the Holocaust. And it was my first insight. I knew about the Holocaust. I learned about it in school. I went to the Holocaust Museum twice. I both times just cried my eyes out over it. Actually, I believe I've been 3 times now. But the book was just such a great firsthand story from a girl that I could relate to that it opened my eyes to how it's so possible for history to repeat itself and how we have to be informed about these injustices and make sure that we stop them before they get out of hand. So I highly recommend My Mother's Secret. I don't have the author written down here of who that's by, but it is a Holocaust book. You can Google it. And then after some of those books, I looked up one day and I realized that I had had babies while I was pregnant. I had read every single what to expect when expecting, what to do when you're pregnant, how to have a healthy pregnancy, how to have a healthy baby. I had this stack of books that I was reading because I thought, oh my gosh, I have to know what I'm doing here. And you guys know I'm a student of life, so I was going to be a great student and figure out how to have a healthy baby. So I remember my doctor telling me, okay, you know what to expect when expecting. Now go pick up a book and read what to expect when you have a kid and you're trying to raise a kid. So then I moved into the world of nursery rhymes and books for kids, and we did bedtime stories and we read. And this time period went by where I realized that I was not really reading for myself. I couldn't remember the last time I had read a book on my own. I had been reading to kids for so many years. So I decided I was going to start reading for myself again. And this is where I went through a phase of trash books. Seriously, anything that a Bravo TV star wrote, I read. They have highly questionable morals, but I will tell you this, they're pretty much hilarious. So I read all of any housewife that put a book out. I read it. I laughed my tail off. It was quality entertainment because I am entertained by that sometimes. But I will tell you that Carol Radziwill's novel, which is called What Remains, it's about the loss of her husband, who was JFK's cousin, JFK Jr., his cousin. It's very poignant, it's very moving, and it was a great one. So even though she was a Bravo TV reality star at a time, I highly recommend What Remains. It's really, really beautiful. I think she's a great author, and she has a way with words. And then I was turned on to Nicholas Sparks. I moved from like the trash novels back into like the romance novels that I loved. To this day, regardless of whether or not they are predictable and hopelessly romantic, I love a Nicholas Sparks novel. I know it's going to take place somewhere on like a foggy East Coast beach. There's going to be a long lost lover that returns from the unknown, and he's going to probably they're going to reignite their love and rekindle their romance, and they're going to have this fleeting love affair where it looks like they're going to live happily ever after, and then he's probably going to pass away in her arms or something super hopelessly romantic. But I still love Nicholas Sparks. Oh, one of my greatest books that I've read. You guys ever read a book where you're like, okay, this book was amazing, and then you go watch the movie and the movie's just not as good as the book? Yeah, Wild by Cheryl Strayed. I love Reese Witherspoon. Isn't that who did Wild? Pretty sure it was. But the internal dialogue that happens in the book, Wild, is so much better than the movie. I loved her journey of seeking out her own personal truth and learning herself and listening to her own voice. I loved all of that. I thought it was so great. So when the movie came out, I convinced my husband to spend an afternoon watching it with me. And then he was kind of like, wait, what's happening? I'm like, oh, you don't know the conversation she just had in her head because they didn't include that in the movie. So if you've seen that movie, go back and read that book. It really encourages you to go seek out your truth and make sure that you're not settling for a journey that you didn't really choose. Okay, so the next one on the list is Janette Wall's The Glass Castle and Half-Broke Horses. So The Glass Castle is a book about a girl who grows up with parents who suffer from mental illness and alcoholism. And it's her struggle and her trying to make sense out of it and her always hoping that they will make the right choices. And she succeeds in spite of some major childhood adversity. And she doesn't resent her parents and she's not angry with them. She loves them where they're at. But it really is an emotional journey that she goes through. And it's just crazy when you read it because you can't even understand, at the time when I read it, I didn't understand as much about mental illness as I do now. I just kept thinking, God, these people, they're selfish. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And today I can look back and be like, oh man, why didn't someone just give them some help? They just needed a hand up, not a handout. They just needed a hand up, someone to come talk with them and help them through it. So then the Half-Broke Horses is a more realistically based fiction story about her grandmother. And it's just from the stories that she gathered from her parents, which once again, remember, they had some mental illness and some addiction issues. But she took these stories, she pieced them together with some facts that she knew from the family, some pictures, and it's just about this obscenely, like, just bold and brazen female that goes and takes these adventures and journeys that no other female would ever take. So I think that's super fun read. It's fun that I'm like, how fun is it that you can go and write this like fictitious story about someone in your family that you may or may not know is all the way true? Kind of makes me want to go write more of a fictitious based story. Okay, so then I was turned on to, and I'm kind of walking you guys through a timeline, literally, of my books throughout life. After that, I read The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom, and then also Glory Over Everything. So these books are both about slavery. They're like written from like a slave's standpoint, The Kitchen House is, and talks about life in slavery, but not just the slavery, but talks about marriage and children and working. And then The Glory Over Everything is about the Underground Railroad and fighting for freedom. And I became obsessed with this. I went on to read several other pre-Civil War books that came from the slave standpoint. And this was, at least 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And I thought, I was so obsessed with it. And I kept telling like girlfriends of mine, I don't know, I'm just really obsessed with these books that are told from this slave standpoint, which is really ironic for any of you that know me as an advocate today. So let's see, Beyond Belief with Jenna Beyond Belief with Jenna Miscavige, however you pronounce it. It's an inside look at Scientology. You guys, this book will totally blow your mind. The bravery that she took, like, it is a true story. It is her life story. And when she stepped outside of the world of Scientology and said, I'm going to tell my truth, I'm going to embrace it, I'm going to share it with the world, and I don't care whom it upsets, that took so much courage. And the book is really, really insightful, really an interesting read as to, what we really don't know about this super secret world. If you haven't read it, go pick it up. I loved the Fanny Flagg All Girls Filling Station book. And this is about a Polish immigrant that became a female pilot in World War II. And I didn't know until this book that there was the Women's Air Force Service pilots, the WASPs, which were actual pilots in World War II. I had never heard about that until this book. And isn't it crazy that that's what a fiction book can do? It can open our eyes to something that we didn't even know about our history or about the women's rights movement. So that's a really funny read. It's told with a nice comedic sense, but it's also has facts involved, and it's really a great female empowerment, liberating book. Of course, The Help. I bet you've read The Help. If you're listening to this podcast, I bet you've read The Help. It was turned into an amazing movie, but the book was like tenfolds better than the movie. As always, I hate to say it, but it always is. And it's about during racial segregation and the maids that were cleaning for the privileged women, white women. And it's all of their dirty stories put together in a book. And it really makes you think about being kind to those that serve you. I always say, I worked in restaurants for 9 years, and I always say that you can tell a lot by the way a person treats their waitress, but you can also tell a whole lot by the way a person treats their housekeeper. And I personally know that my housekeeper has told some stories about some people that she's worked for before. And she's told me that they are not good people, and she only cleans for good people. So it was a really, really good read. Great read. I recommend picking it up. So the same author, Secret Life of Bees. We're talking about racial injustice, civil rights movement, segregation. So The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd is another really impactful book. Go pick it up. So good. But Sue Monk Kidd also wrote The Invention of Wings, and it's super, I don't even know, it's amazing as you start to put these things down on paper and you start looking at the books you've read over time and the books that stuck out to you and stood out to you. You realize that there was this path that you have been on for all these years and you didn't even recognize it at the time. You didn't realize that everything was like adding up and everything was speaking to abolitionism, being an abolitionist, being a freedom fighter, women's movement, the Holocaust, social injustice. You don't even realize that until you start putting it down on paper and you're like, oh, I've actually always been interested in the same things I'm interested in today. These are the books I've been reading over time. I just didn't realize that they all would come together one day as part of my purpose. And so for the last 2.5, 3 years, I've done a lot of space in the personal development world. I read a lot of books about business, about purpose, about discovering your journey, your why. And so some of the ones that I have read lately, I'm not going to bore you with the ones that I've read lately. I'm going to talk about, I do have some books on the list that I want to read. And I've downloaded Undaunted by Christine Kane. That is one I'm reading this summer. And then I'm also going to read, Brave Not Perfect by Reshma Saujani. And the greatest part about this book, if you guys don't know who she is, you need to go look her up because she's done some pretty impressive things. She has an organization called Girls Who Code. So I met this young lady that was in college on a plane. It was, I guess, maybe her spring break from college. I was flying up to Nashville for one night, and we got to chit-chatting, and she started telling me about Girls Who Code. She was an organization leader for this, or a chapter leader for this organization. And she told me about the founder. I went on to find the founder, research her, and realized that she was the author of Brave Not Perfect. So that's one I've read some parts of, but I am going to complete that this summer. And then Brene Brown, I read that, Braving the Wilderness recently, but I believe she's got a new book out that I was going to look at this summer. She does a great job of really speaking about all the issues that we need to talk about. And I'm going to bring up one other book that I've read that I think is important if you're a mama on here, if you're a mama of boys like I am. If you have not read Wild at Heart by John Eldredge, go pick it up and read it now. The reason is this book does such a great job of explaining to you why your boys have the drive that they have to be who God created them to be. It's all part of the fact that like Adam was created outside of the garden and Eve was created inside of the garden, and the things that your son wants to do innately were put there by God. So this book was the greatest book that helped me understand the fact that my husband and my children really only enjoy things that might possibly kill them. They don't like soaking in a bubble bath or getting pedicures. They like crazy wild adventure. So I highly recommend that. If you guys have some books that you are reading or that you've read that you love, I would love to hear about them. And I also have a group over on Facebook called The Power Squad, where we discuss books that we love, books that have impacted us, books that we want to read. So you should go check us out over at The Power Squad on Facebook, and you can give us some of your recommendations. I hope that you enjoyed what you heard today. I know that it's kind of fun when I get to just talk to you guys about things that I love, and when I start an episode like this, I go into it thinking that I have no idea what I'm going to talk about, and then by the end of it, I have rambled on for something like half an hour uninterrupted. So as always, if you like what you heard, do us a favor, head over and write a review. Tell us what you thought, rate us, and then share us with all forms of social media. Make sure you tell all of your girlfriends about us, and we can keep bringing these episodes to you. I can't wait to chat with you guys next week, but until then, go out and live your best purpose-filled lives.